Welcome, everyone. I'm Joseph Kearney, and it's a great privilege for me to introduce this event. I am especially excited because Mike Gousha, our distinguished fellow in law and public policy, has persuaded Jim Doyle, governor of Wisconsin, to join us this afternoon. To say anything after noting that one is the governor of Wisconsin is almost destined to be anticlimactic, but I do want to provide a thumbnail sketch of the governor's career because it is rich and varied and I think is especially interesting for future lawyers. Governor Doyle is a former member of the Peace Corps, a graduate of Harvard Law School, and a former legal services lawyer on a Navajo Indian reservation in in Arizona. It's the danger of departing from the prepared notes. But when you don't have the podium to hide the notes, you take your chances. After these various undertakings, Governor Doyle returned to his hometown of Madison, Wisconsin, and became a member of the Wisconsin Bar. I have not confirmed with him, but I suspect that this was by virtue of the bar exam, not the diploma privilege. But
I had to do it the hard way.
That is not to worry, because that is a matter, and I'm sure the governor will agree, is constitutionally committed to the judicial branch of the state of Wisconsin. Not everything falls within his purview, but most everything else. And over the ensuing 30-plus years, Governor Doyle has been in both private practice and even more extensively public service. He served for 3 terms as the district attorney for Dane County, 3 4-year terms as the attorney general of the state, and he is now in the first year of his 2nd term as governor of Wisconsin, having won re-election this past November. Mike, I want to thank you for extending the invitation to Governor Doyle. Governor Doyle, I especially want to thank you for accepting the invitation and joining us. I know that you have a deep interest not only in Wisconsin generally, but in the city of Milwaukee specifically, so it strikes me as right that you should be here at Milwaukee's law school, even in your first year as the 2nd term governor. I hope that in the coming years you will be a frequent visitor here and that you will come to regard us as the place to come in Milwaukee, whether it's for policy discussions or policy announcements or who knows, maybe even on a stop just to even things out with the DA and the Attorney General's tenure for a 3rd term as governor of Wisconsin. So please join me in welcoming Governor Jim Doyle.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Kearney. I'd like to also thank all of you for being with us today, taking time from your busy schedules as the year winds down. And I'd like to extend my personal thanks to the governor for taking time from his busy schedule to be with us today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike.
For sharing some time with us. We do want to talk with the governor about his plans for Milwaukee, about the state budget, about his decision to pursue public service as a career. But since we have a room full of attorneys or future attorneys, I think we might want to begin with talking about the remarkable decision last Thursday that the U.S. Appellate Court panel overturning the conviction of Georgia Thompson, the state employee who, as you all know, was accused and convicted by a jury of steering a travel contract to a firm, a mobile firm, whose top officials donated legally to Governor Doyle's campaign. On Thursday, you seemed a little hot under the collar about all of this. You criticized the news media for sensationalism, criticized the partisan political attacks. You had a few days to think about it. Do you still feel as strongly today as you did on Thursday?
Maybe a little more so. But let me say what happened last week, I hope you've had a chance to look at it, was extraordinary. And all the commentators on criminal law matters, people who have followed it over the years, and I'm sure the faculty at this great law school would confirm that what happened was really unbelievable. I mean, and if you put yourself in the place of a woman who I've personally never met, working in sort of the middle level of the Wisconsin bureaucracy, the state of Wisconsin bureaucracy, who gets caught in the middle of all of these political whirlwinds and ends up going to prison for 4.5 months. Her lawyers go to argue the case before the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, and you know, you're always reading these appellate decisions, so you know how appellate courts work. The arguments were made, and normally in the course of an appellate decision, and I've been there many times, they say thank you very much, and you don't have any idea where it's going, and you know, at the earliest, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks down the road, an opinion comes out. In this case, the 3-judge panel heard the case, and if any of you are interested in listening to a legal argument that you probably just as soon not have happened to you, you ought to, you can listen to it on the internet, and went out briefly and came back in and said that the conviction was not only reversed, which is what an appellate court very occasionally does, but on top of it, they actually entered a judgment of acquittal. I mean, as you know, all of you from your appellate, reading all those appellate case books, you know it's reversed and normally sent back. In this case, a judgment of acquittal was entered on her behalf, and the court said, let her out of prison by the end of the workday today. Imagine if you're this woman who's, I don't know what her lawyers were telling her, but I know what I would have said, which is we're going to argue in front of the 7th Circuit today, and we probably have some pretty good arguments to make, but you never know what will happen, and then the court will take it under advisement, and you'll hear from us in a number of weeks. Imagine if you're her and they come to you in the prison in Illinois and say, you're walking out today. Now, you know, there's obviously a lot of national inquiry going on now about the politicization of the Department of Justice, and you know, that's going to be for other people other than me to decide whether anything, you know, what went on and so on. And I just as soon not sort of enter into that debate. That's for other people. But there is no doubt that this innocent woman was used by the Republican opponents in just a completely unseemly way. Over $4 million of political advertising was put on TV in the months leading to the election using her and that case. Imagine, I mean, you get convicted and then you have over $4 million of advertising going on, talking about how, I mean, just untruthful things. She's a member of my administration and those kinds of things, but used against this woman. Now, the way I see it is I'm a big boy. I'm in this arena. People don't say nice things about you, and the sort of level of discourse, you know, is pretty mean at times. But she isn't in that world, and the use of this woman as just political cannon fodder was, in the wake of this decision by the Court of Appeals, I think should cause everybody to sort of look back and say, you know, did we do this right? And was this right to do this to this woman?
Can I jump in there for
Sure.
a moment? Because in keeping with that thought, and this just came to my attention literally before we walked in here today, there's now a story crossing the wire, and it says that the 6 Democrats on the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, including Russ Feingold and Herb Kohl, today told Attorney General Alberto Gonzales to produce all Justice Department materials and documents related to the overturned conviction of a former state purchasing supervisor. The quote says, "We are concerned whether or not politics may have played a role in a case brought by Stephen Biskupik, the U.S. attorney based in Milwaukee, against Georgia Thompson." That's what's contained in the letter written by the 6 senators to Gonzales. You seem to not want to comment on that, but that is certainly a new development. What is your reaction to that development?
Well, I don't think it should be unexpected that people are going to ask some pretty hard questions about how this happened. If any of you go, I would encourage you, if you want to just hear an appellate argument that probably is a little different than your moot court experience. But, you know, in the course of the argument, the judges, and in fact, the government acknowledged that this woman had absolutely no knowledge of any political contributions that had been made to my campaign. The government acknowledged that every contact between the Edelman Company, which is a good, reputable local travel company, and me was perfectly appropriate. The government acknowledged that in this, and I think that the judges of the Court of Appeals were sort of saying, well, then what's this case about? Why is this woman, in fact, they even said it, why is this woman sitting in prison? So I think it's, it's understandable why, given what's happened with the other U.S. attorneys that were fired for supposedly not adhering. I mean, again, this is all for other people to decide, that this is going to be a matter that's going to receive some attention. But, you know, I just hope we don't lose sight of what happened here, which is, again, I understand. I put my name forward on a ballot, and when you do that in politics, particularly at the level where people are spending, you know, millions and millions and millions of dollars, you better be ready to take some pretty wild accusations that are made. But if you're a person who's working in the civil service in the state of Wisconsin, who, by the way, was hired in a prior administration through a merit selection process, somebody I've never met, she's there doing her job, and she ends up the subject of that kind of political attack, I just think it should, you know, people should pause. Let me make one other point about the media, because it's amazing to watch the kind of sensitivity that occurs on the media's part. It's when, if the things that were said about me were ever said back a little bit, my God, the response is, oh, what happened here? But there was actually one point I made that just has been lost by the media outlet I said it about. It had to do with Channel 27 News in Madison, that actually runs promos on why people should watch the channel based on how their investigative reporting led to the conviction of this innocent woman. That was what I particularly pointed out in my comment, that you were commercially promoting the channel on the back of this woman. And Channel 27 then went on to do a number of stories about whether they had reported it fairly, and somehow sort of never got around to this issue about how they had promoted watching their channel.
Just a couple quick final questions on this subject. Are you surprised, how do you explain the fact that a jury of Georgia Thompson's peers came back with a guilty verdict and a judge upheld that verdict? How do you explain that? If the case was so thin as described by the appellate panel, how do you explain that?
Well, a lot of it depends on how a jury's instructed, and I'm not the lawyer here, and people tell me to quit thinking about being a lawyer, but a lot of that depends on how a jury's instructed. And if a jury's asked to find certain kinds of facts and those instructions are not correct, consistent with the law, then you end up, and now again, I don't want to say that's what happened here or didn't happen here, but there are a lot of things that go into a jury verdict, and particularly what is the law that the judge instructs them on, which for all of you who are going to go into trial law, you're going to find that those jury instructions are the heart of the case that you're going to put together when you try a case, because that's going to tell the jury what they, how they should behave, but and how they should find, or how they, what the issues are that they should define. But again, I'll tell you this, in this room full of lawyers, one thing that people tell me regularly now is quit being a lawyer. Let other people be the lawyers. Quit thinking like a lawyer, because as much as I respect legal education, Dean, and thank you for being here, for having me here, one of the things I had to learn moving from the Attorney General's office to the Governor's office is that issues move from being kind of a legal analysis to some very different kinds of analysis that you have to do as governor.
All right, let me ask one more question on this. The New York Times yesterday editorialized and said there should be a congressional investigation looking into this, but the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, as you probably saw over the weekend, had a slightly different take on what occurred on Thursday. And if I could just read briefly what the newspaper had to say here. This is a local newspaper. It says, and I'm quoting, "Okay, Governor, tired of folks, the media included, noting that people who contribute often benefit, tired of people drawing unwarranted conclusions from the indictment of a Kenosha businessman who might benefit if you view with favor a casino deal he was involved in. The businessman is accused of laundering contributions to your campaign through his family members. If you are weary of this," it goes on to say, "help take away any possibility that such conclusions can be drawn. Push for campaign finance reform that includes sufficient public financing. Without this, there will be more such allegations in many politicians' futures, and without this reform, you ask the public to simply trust you and every other politician who accepts contributions from special interests who want something from government." It says the public is beyond that kind of trust. What is your response to that?
Well, generally I agree, and I've been in favor of campaign finance reform for a long time. Occasionally I have to let people know as governor, I get to do a lot of things, but I can't make a law by myself. And while I have supported good, broad range campaign finance reform, we've had a legislature of a different party that has seen it very differently, and we haven't been able to get it passed in Wisconsin. Having said that, though, I guess I just, on whether I've asked people to accept it, no, I asked people to look at the facts. And in this case, we now know the facts. The facts were, and acknowledged by the government, that there was absolutely no evidence at all to suggest that Georgia Thompson knew anything about a campaign contribution. So I don't ask people to just assume facts. I ask them to look at the facts, and the facts in this case were very clear, and I hope people look at them.
Are you troubled by big money in politics today? Estimates as much as $32 million in the last governor's race, if you include outside money, and then this just came off the Supreme Court race, $6 million, tough race. Are you troubled by the impacts of money on the process?
Well, I'm most troubled by the effect of the outside money. I mean, if it's one campaign against the other campaign, and people know who's spending the money and where it comes from, and it's raised under appropriate limits that Wisconsin sets out, and we have significant limits like many other states don't have any. If you just one campaign against another, then I guess I have a lot of trust that the people of the state can understand who's saying and what they're saying, and then cast their vote. The problem we've had is that now, in the last 2 or 3, and it grows each election, is outside forces come in that the campaigns are absolutely prohibited correctly from having any connection with. I mean, you can't on a campaign have any kind of connection with an outside independent expenditure. They call these so-called things issue ads, and then what they are just plain old political attack ads, and they come in ways by which people do not have to don't have to follow Wisconsin law on how they raise money. So, for example, we prohibit corporate contributions. My campaign can't take money from a corporation, but an independent group, a corporation, can write a check for $10 million, and it can go right on to the air. So they don't have those limits, and they don't have to disclose where their money's coming from. I have proposed a very simple answer to this, which is to say, and was upheld by the United States Supreme Court in their McCain-Feingold decision, is that if an ad is made within 60 days of an election, and the ad mentions a candidate by name or shows a picture of a candidate, then that ad will be called a political ad. We're not going to pretend it's a issue ad. We're going to call it a political ad by law in Wisconsin. And if we just said that, then anybody wanting to run those ads would have to register as a political committee with our state elections board. They'd have to raise money consistent with Wisconsin law, and they would have to tell people where their money is coming from. And I guarantee you, if they had to do those three things, you'd see probably all of it, but you'd see 95% of those ads come off the air. Then you're down to one campaign against the other campaign. And I think at that point it becomes a lot easier for voters to sort out all of this stuff. And if they think one campaign's being too negative or is not making a valid point, they can, vote for the other candidate. But I think that's the first and most immediate and cleanest way that we can take out this money that we don't even know where it comes from, that is making up greater and greater percentage of the political advertising that you now see in elections.
Let's talk about the city of Milwaukee. You have put millions of dollars in your budget proposal for the city of Milwaukee. About a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, we had the Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin with us. We were talking about crime-fighting strategies, and he said he was struck by how often during his campaign for Attorney General he would run into people whom he described as intelligent and rational people, and they said, forget about Milwaukee. It's a lost cause. Quit throwing money their way. Quit throwing resources their way. Just forget about them. Is your proposal to spend money on Milwaukee going to float without state lawmakers?
Well, fortunately, I don't. Maybe I meet people who are thinking that, but they don't say it to me. I hope it will. I stood up in my State of the State address and said something that, at least from what we can see, has never been said by a governor in the state of Wisconsin. It's something I believe very, very strongly. And the State of the State is the report of the governor to the legislature and the people of the state. And what I said was that Wisconsin's future, our economic future, depends on having a strong, thriving, growing Milwaukee. That for Wisconsin to be a strong, thriving, growing state, we need to have a large urban center. And Milwaukee is that for us. And it has been our center of commerce. It's been our center of finance. It has been our center of manufacturing. And it's been our center of culture since the state was founded. And while we have many other wonderful communities in this state, you know, Madison is always a nationally ranked top community, but it is a city of 225,000. It is, and it is a metropolitan area that is less than half the size of this metropolitan area. So it is important that we really understand that our future as a state, and as I said in my speech, it didn't matter if you came from Marquette or Milwaukee, our future as a state depends on having a good, strong, thriving Milwaukee. So and believe me, I'm as I said that to everybody, and I say that when I'm in Eau Claire, and I say it when I'm in Milwaukee. I consider it one of my really important responsibilities as governor is to make sure that people in this state, or to be as persuasive as I can in convincing people of this state that our futures are all linked together. And one of the great things about this state, one of the wonderful things about this state is its variety. And I want people to have choices in their life on whether they want to live in the big city life, as many people do. A couple of them sitting in front of me who are big city people, if I might say that, dear friends of mine. And I want people to be able to choose to live in small towns and middle-sized cities and rural communities. And in Wisconsin, we have that choice for people. But we really do have to make sure that we have a good, strong, thriving, major urban center, big league city, and that's what we really have to support.
Let's spend a little more time on this. How do you view the Milwaukee economy 5 or 10 years out? I think most people would agree that we're still in a period of transition from an economy that was largely based on manufacturing. Now we're sort of moving in a different direction. Where do you see us 5 or 10 years? Where would you like to see us 5 or 10 years down the road?
There's no doubt we're in a point of transition. I think if you look at history, you're always in a point of transition, but I think maybe we can see it a little more clearly right now, that the great economic powerhouse of southeast Wisconsin, based on this major, being a major center of manufacturing coming out of the Second World War, in which we were the envy of the nation. We had the finest, most highly trained, skilled workers found anywhere in the world. Those workers earned good wages, and much of Milwaukee was built around that economy. And you can go through neighborhood after neighborhood of, you know, beautiful homes that aren't very big, but those were the homes that those workers and their families lived in. My view of this is that we have to make sure manufacturing remains an incredibly strong part of the picture. That we should not fall into this trap of saying that somehow manufacturing is all going to China. And much of what I've done as governor has been directed at modernizing our manufacturing capacity. It is really essential as a state, and Milwaukee and southeast Wisconsin is at the center of this, is that we compete for manufacturing on a world, in a competitive world economy, and that we compete at the high end. If we're competing for those low-wage jobs that require very limited skills, we probably are going to, and have been for years, losing that competition. But if we compete at the high end for the highest quality products made by the best trained workers, we can compete. I'll just give you a couple of the most obvious examples. Harley-Davidson. You know, if you want to have a bike built by the best trained people that is of the absolute highest quality, that gets top dollar, believe me, any of you out there trying to buy a Harley or have a Harley, you know the price, but commands that kind of value because of the craftsmanship, it's a product made here in Wisconsin. GE Medical. If you want to have the most sophisticated medical equipment made by highly trained workers, high-end manufacturing, you're going to buy a product that's made here in Wisconsin. And I could go down the list. So to me, this is about a manufacturing base that is much more productive, lean manufacturing, much more highly technological, and directed at high-end products requiring real investment in the education and training of workers. That's where Wisconsin's future lies. In addition, though, there is an emerging new economy that is very, very important. And Wisconsin has a very significant edge right now. In biosciences and life sciences, we are at the absolute center of the most cutting-edge research going on anywhere in the world. And a major part of the budget that I put forward is a significant investment in the Medical College of Wisconsin, in the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, in the high-tech medical research campus that's developing on the county grounds. This, I believe, is an area where Milwaukee can be a major center of research and of the businesses that come out of that research. And finally, let me say that increasingly our economy is a service-oriented economy. And you just look at the job base in Milwaukee and the mix of those jobs. And that's why it's essential that great, great companies, Northwestern Mutual, for example, and others that are headquartered here, that we really do all we can to see that they grow and expand here in Wisconsin. So it is understanding where our economy is headed and trying to make sure that we are making the investments right now in what it takes so that 5, 10, 15 years from now, I think about it a lot. What will people be doing 5 and 10, 15 years from now? What kind of jobs are they going to have? And are they going to be the kind of jobs that you can buy a home and support your family? And that's really got to be our goal. We've got great, great assets for us going in Wisconsin, but part of this is making sure that this urban center is a true center of commerce, a true financial center, one that really supports those kinds of businesses that provide those kinds of jobs.
And you think state lawmakers will buy into that vision?
I believe they will. I'll be a little partisan here. I think we have a lot better chance of it now that we have a Democratic Senate. I think we're going to have to do a little selling in the Republican-controlled Assembly, although that margin is much closer. And I say to people on the Democratic side of this that, on a lot of these issues, no matter where you're from, if you're a Democrat, you better be worried about the level of education that people are receiving everywhere in the state, including Milwaukee. And if you're a Democrat, you better be concerned about infant mortality rates, and you better be concerned about the kind of health care kids are receiving. And let me say, to be a little bipartisan about this, I think we've got some very good support on the Republican side for this. A little bit of the question comes on how it ends up getting played politically, and does the Republicans as a party just take another position, or can we work in the middle and get things done? And I guess I'm very hopeful we can.
You mentioned companies that are in this area, and you mentioned Northwestern Mutual, but another one that's been in the news a lot lately is Midwest Airlines. And on Friday, the board of directors of Midwest is at least scheduled to act on the latest offer by AirTran. AirTran engaged in a hostile takeover attempt at Midwest. What do you think would be the impact of Midwest Airlines being sold to AirTran?
I think it would be very negative for the state. I think we are very, very fortunate to have a state-owned airlines that is hubbed in the state. Most states, in Wisconsin's range of, the 24th or 25th biggest state in the country, we're right in the middle. Most states like that don't have an airline that's hubbed here, that's hubbed in the state. And Midwest, which is increasingly getting good national, I'll be on Midwest flights. For example, the other day I was in Washington going to LA, so it wasn't even Wisconsin people who were on it. They were getting on it, and everybody talking about what the quality of this airline is. So I understand that there are certain things the state can do and we can't do, and in these kinds of takeover bids, it's going to be made by shareholders and others. I mean, that's where the decision of this is going to be made. But I really hope that people understand. I think the long-term value of this airline depends on it maintaining its identity and being hubbed here in Milwaukee.
Let me ask you a quick question about the budget. Your critics say this budget contains $1.7 billion of new fees, taxes, revenue enhancements. What does that mean for the average taxpayer? And I know you've talked a lot about taxes over your first term and the first year of your second term. What does it mean for the typical taxpayer?
Well, as one legislator said, you're not going to like my budget if you are a big oil executive who smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day. But if you're not that, you are going to like it a lot, because we have really focused in tax policy on trying to make sure that Wisconsin's doing right by the people who are going out every single day and working hard. So in the budget that I put forward, we have significant tax reductions for families. For example, under this budget, anyone will be able to deduct the full cost of their health insurance premiums. This will help hundreds of thousands of Wisconsin families on an average of about $450 a year. It's hardly going to make health insurance suddenly an easily affordable item, but it's a way that we as a state help people afford it. My budget will allow people to deduct their child care costs. I can remember when my youngest son went off to kindergarten, and it was the happiest day of my wife and my life. We had a little respite till they started the oldest started going to college, and then we started paying that. But I can remember those days and us writing those checks for child care, and I believe in Wisconsin families should be able to deduct those child care costs. This year will be the first year that we will no longer tax Social Security income at all in the state of Wisconsin. So, to me, this is where you deliver tax relief. I'll tell you where the taxes are that some Republicans have opposed, others seem to be okay, is we significantly increased the tax on cigarettes to $1.25 a pack. And frankly, I hope this is a tax that in a few years we never get a penny out of. I mean, the whole purpose of this, together with my proposal for a statewide smoking ban, is that we really do all we can right now to try to help people stop smoking, to keep young people from starting to smoke. And I also believe that the big oil companies should have to pay some of the cost for the roads in Wisconsin. Who was one of the CEOs I just read made $400 million last year. And I'm asking for the big oil companies through an oil franchise fee to have to pay some amount of money rather than you all having to pay another penny or two or three at the gas pump. Let's let the big oil companies come up and pay some of the costs to make sure our roads are in good shape. They get a lot of benefit from these roads. People use them, and when they use them, they buy their gasoline products. And these people have made the biggest profits in the history of the world over the last 2 years. And so those are the two areas that we would increase taxes, but where we would really be given help is people with college tuition. By the way, you'll be able to deduct up to $6,000 for college tuition, and for the first time ever include books and fees in that, as well as child care and health care costs. So to me, it's basic fairness. Who are you trying to help here? And it's pretty clear who I'm trying to help. I'm trying to help a family that's out there trying to make ends meet.
Well, we'll take questions in just about 5 minutes, but there are just a couple of matters that I'd love to have you comment on. And a couple of them are of interest to the law school students, I'm sure. Marquette University Law School just had a day-long conference on what it was referred to as the justice gap. This is civil legal aid. And Wisconsin has, frankly, from a governmental standpoint, paled in comparison to states like Ohio and Illinois and Michigan. You've put $1 million now into the budget for that. Why did you do that, and will there be more to come, do you think, in the years ahead?
Well, I hope so. I hope people understand how important this is, and I do really want to acknowledge the Marquette Law School that has done a lot to help people over the years, help people who aren't otherwise able to afford legal representation. As the dean alluded to in the introduction, my first 3 years out of law school, I went from Cambridge, Massachusetts to a little place in the middle of the Navajo Reservation in northeast Arizona and lived there for 3 years. And my legal practice was representing Navajo and Hopi people, many of whom spoke no or very little English, in dealing with a wide variety of largely civil matters. So sort of like who I am and where I come from, and I understand how important it is. And in Wisconsin, we have tried to get by over the years, both with the federal help from Federal Legal Services, which has been a steadily declining commitment by the federal government, unfortunately, over many years, and then the interest on trust accounts for lawyers. And as interest rates went down, that income became less and less. And so I think it's reasonable for the state to step up and help out. By the way, my sister is a lawyer at Legal Aid in Milwaukee, so I continue to be part of this world. And these are people that desperately need help. She's over there helping people. Now you're reading in the paper all of these subprime mortgages. It wasn't like news to me because I just needed to sit down and ask my sister sort of what she was doing and all of the problems really good, hard-working people were having because they had gotten led into these kinds of deals. So to me, this is a very important part of who we are as a state and a country, and people should be able to have access to the courts and be able to have their grievances settled in courts. And I think it's sort of been often said, but it's better to have them settled in courts than out on the streets, and part of that is having decent legal representation.
You have just named a commission to examine the issue of racial disparity in the criminal justice system. What do you hope to accomplish from that? What do you hope the commission will do that will make a difference?
Well, as I said to the commission, and it's a really great group of people who have been at this a long time, I said, you know, what I don't want you to do is come back and tell me there's a disparity. And what we should be concerned about in Wisconsin is, you know, there is a disparity in every state. And people argue endlessly about whether that's because of economic factors or whether there's some basic inherent discrimination that's in the system at various places or a combination of two. What we should be concerned about in Wisconsin is our disparity is among the worst in the country. I mean, if we were just kind of like in the middle ground, then you could have that argument. But there's no real reason, I mean, there's no apparent reason why the disparity should be greater in Wisconsin than it is in Ohio. So I asked the commission I think they have to really look at two things. And I've spent most of my career in law enforcement as a district attorney, attorney general. First is really look at this system from sort of early contacts with police to the Department of Corrections making release decisions and the whole continuum in between, and identify where, if at all, there are clear areas where that system is discriminatory. And then give us some very good answers practical answers on how to deal with that. And the second area is, obviously a great deal of this has to do with social conditions. And, you know, people who argue otherwise just have their eyes shut to the reality of the world. I've often gotten again, I've been in law enforcement most of my career, and I just get so frustrated by this argument about whether it's all about personal responsibility or all about social conditions. You know, it's about both of those things, and they are not exclusive of one another. It is about personal responsibility, and people who commit crimes and commit serious crimes need to be arrested and prosecuted, and they need to be locked up to protect us all. But nobody can say that the social conditions don't have something to do with having people make very irresponsible personal decisions. And so, you know, we have to look at both sides of this, and I look forward to, again, the commission. I didn't appoint people that are milquetoasts on this. I appointed people who I know have very strong views on it, and I think will come through with some very, very specific recommendations of what can be done.
Let's take some questions from the students and the faculty members who are here. Thank you very much, Dan, for handling the mic duties. Anybody have a question for Governor Doyle?
I always remember the terror of this when the questions came from this way out to you all. And first time I was ever asked a question was in a contracts class, and I like all of you, I don't know, in the first year I'd sit there hoping, oh, please don't call on me. And we had very big classes, and I had made it through like about the first 2 months, and I sat right in this seat. And at the end of 2 months on a Friday, with 5 minutes to go, when my mind had sort of, oh, good, I made it through another week, the professor called on me, and not a word came out of my mouth. I couldn't formulate it. It's still, as you all will have in years to come, I still have a dream about that incident, a recurring dream about it.
Any questions for Governor Doyle? Well, I have a question, as long as we're waiting. Take your time to formulate your questions. Let's talk about public service. You got your degree from Harvard Law. You're probably had a few options when you came out of college, and you chose public service. Why?
Well, in my case, I think it was probably a combination of a number of things. I really went to law school after 2 years in the Peace Corps in Tunisia and North Africa. So I really I went there pretty clearly because I wanted to do public service. So it wasn't like I grappled with this issue in my life. I mean, it was really what I wanted to do. I came from a family that was very committed in various ways to public service, so I assumed it was sort of beaten into me at some point. And then also, my wife and I were really up for another adventure. We'd spent 2 years in Africa, and one of my frustrations in the Peace Corps was that I had limited skills. Peace Corps has changed since then. Now it really looks for people with skills, but back in its early days, you know, our skill was that my wife was a good French speaker, and I happened to be her husband. That was our skill. So I really wanted to have that sort of Peace Corps experience again, but now really in a culture that was at least a system that was mine and one that I could really do something in. And on the Navajo Reservation, I really found it. I mean, it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I really encourage all of you to look at this hard and really make some, I'll give you a couple of other reasons. I see some dear friends of mine here who are in big firms, but I never had to spend the first 3 years sitting in a library with some, I was in court the first 3 weeks I was out, and I was arguing cases in the United States Courts of Appeals in the Western states in my first year out of law school. I mean, it was kind of like, here's all this work, go to work. So it was wonderful that way. But having said all of that, I want to also emphasize, I spent 8 years in private practice, and they were 8 great years. And I learned that public service doesn't necessarily mean just what job you have, because over the years I've seen so many people who are in the private sector, work in private law firms, do wonderful work on behalf of their clients, but also commit themselves to public service in so many different ways, mentoring kids after school, using their legal talent as a volunteer attorney for legal aid. I just see people that public service isn't all or nothing. It's something I hope that you find a way to build into your life. And I know that's the Marquette tradition. I know it's the Jesuit tradition, and it is something that I hope you really hold dear as you go along in your legal career.
I see. Is there a question over here? There we go.
I was just hoping you could expand on the smoking ban in the state of Wisconsin, how you think that will work, if it can work, if it is working in Madison, and how we can help businesses to make that change.
Well, I think there's no doubt now the smoking ban can work. I mean, Ireland is smoke-free, the city of New York is smoke-free, all of California is smoke-free, so I don't think there's really any question anymore about whether this works. And I also don't think there's any question about where we're headed as a society and as a country. I guarantee you there will be a general smoking ban across this country. I can't tell you whether it's going to be in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, but often it's pretty hard to figure out what the historical trend on some issue is, but this shouldn't everybody should understand. We just need to tell stories about 5 years or 10 years ago about where we were and where we are today. My view of this is Wisconsin should get there faster rather than later. Let's not be one of these states that gets dragged along at the end of all of this. Let's do it now. We know it's healthier. We know it's better for people. And if you talk to people in California, they'll say that the first week or so or a couple of weeks was quite an adjustment, and then people, that's the way they live. Just as if you had been in this class, maybe, I don't know if you allowed smoking in the classroom at any time, but you would have found people smoking in here and in the hallways. If you walked in and saw how people smoked here 20 years ago, you would be shocked. And I think that'll happen very quickly. It's also fair. I mean, I live in a little house in Madison, which happens to be right on if those of you know Madison, if you go along Sherman Avenue on the east side of Madison, it's the city of Madison, the town of Blooming Grove, the town of Madison, the city of Madison, each block is a different jurisdiction. If you happen to be a bar that was located on a block that's the city of Madison, you're pretty much out of business now right along that street. If you happen to be in a bar located where you could smoke, and by the way, this wasn't just for smokers. I mean, as bar owners talk to me about it, it's like if a softball team after a game, and there are 2 smokers on the team, they'll go to the bar for the 2 smokers, and the other bar has lost that whole softball team coming in after the game. So to me, I agree with that. I think they have a legitimate complaint about a level playing field, and it seems to me the simplest, easiest level playing field is let's just have a smoking ban statewide. So I have no doubt this is going to be enacted. I hope it's during my time as governor. I would love to be the governor that signs it into law. But let's just get there sooner rather than later, because I don't think anybody can argue that this isn't coming all over this country.
We have a question right over here.
What are your thoughts on former Governor Tommy Thompson running for president?
Well, I'll tell you one thing I don't know much about is Republican presidential politics. So the comment I will make is what would apply to any Republican right now running for president, which is I wouldn't want to be a Republican running for president right now. I think if you look, I just saw one of these national polls the last couple of days where for years, generally, in the last 10 years, people have self-identified as Republican or Democrat at about 43-43. Right now it's 50-35. So there's a very significant thing that happened last November. I think you see it happening. Now that doesn't say that things can't change, but I just think that Republican, if things kind of stay the same where they are right now, I think people are really saying we're going to make a change in the presidency.
So what do you think about Tommy Thompson running?
Well, like I say, I've got, I'll talk to you about the Democratic side of things, but it's pretty hard for me to comment on the Republican side of it.
Another question over there.
Yes. I'd like you to expand a little bit more on a topic that came up early, which is campaign finance reform, which is I'll get on my soapbox here for a moment, a corrupting influence in our political process and perhaps a tangible danger to our democracy because it incents people to just drop out. And I want to know what you will do to, if necessary, drag the legislature along into enacting some of the reforms that you mentioned to keep Wisconsin from falling behind what other states are trying to do and should be doing to correct this problem.
Well, let me just tell you first what I think you have to do, and it isn't rocket science on what you need for a public financing bill. You need to do 2 or 3 basic things, and for all of you scholars of this, you're well aware of it. Given the framework that the United States Supreme Court has laid down, you have to have a system that has enough public money in it that entices people to participate in the system and discourages people from opting out of the system, because there's no way by law that you can demand that people take part in the system. You know, Wisconsin actually has a pretty good framework. The problem is there is no public money in it at all, and that the limits that have been set are currently so low that nobody would ever agree to them. So for example, in Wisconsin, a governor, if I have these numbers right, in a governor's race, I think the limit's about $1.2 million, which is this was set in the 1970s. And I think that if you agreed to participate, given the money that was in the pot, you might have gotten, I forgot, but $30,000 or $40,000. So we're just way out of whack on what that is. We need to make sure there are reasonable spending limits, and then you need to make sure that there are reasonable contribution limits. And I think people have to be very careful about this, because a lot of states that have gone to very, very low contribution limits of 100 or 200, and I know many candidates who have run in a couple of states that have done it, Massachusetts and Arizona, that requires you to spend all your time fundraising. So you've got to find the right balance between a limit that isn't so high that people can buy policy, but not so low that it just requires candidates to do nothing but to fundraise. And then you've got, as I say, you've got to have a public pot of money that's large enough that says to somebody, if you opt into the system, you will get a certain amount of money by opting in, and if you refuse to, your opponent will get your money. So that's and then the other thing you have to do is the independent issue ads that I talked about. If you've got those, so it's not rocket science kind of what you have to get done. The problem has been that the Republicans have been adamant against the use of any public money in a political campaign, and that has been a position of the Wisconsin. Actually, it's been pretty much their national position. If you watch the presidential candidates on this issue, Republicans will always talk about no public money going, and the rhetoric is usually you don't want a taxpayer's money going to support a political position that is contrary to what their beliefs are. So you really need to get over that somehow, because if you just say there's not going to be any public money, then you can't move forward. And so there are these gimmicks about getting public money, check-offs on your taxes. I've said it should be a direct appropriation in the state budget that puts the money in there. And we need, I would say there were some major steps made forward in November on it. We now have a Democratic Senate and we have a Republican Assembly, but the vote is much closer. And I personally hope that when we get through the budget and move into the fall, that this is the time to get this done. Because if one party is completely in power, I'll tell you the system that they enact will be inherently unfair to the other party. So we have an opportunity right now with a Republican Assembly and a Democratic Senate, if people are willing to compromise on this. And I'll just tell you, I have found that this is an issue that people are amazingly unwilling to compromise on both sides. It's got to be, it has to be completely my way or the other way, but I think this is one that if we can agree that there should be public money, then we should be compromising on how much that should be. And if we should agree there should be limits on contributions, then we should be compromising on how much those limits should be. But those are the areas that we could get in and get something done. So again, I think this is an opportunity for us in the state with houses of different parties to try to craft a bill that neither party says gives an advantage to the other.
Let's go over here for a question.
You talked about maintaining and securing current industry and business in Milwaukee now. What measures or plans do you have to kind of entice entrepreneurs or small businesses or maybe even companies that want to move their headquarters to Milwaukee? What plans or how do you envision doing that?
That's a great question, and it's really at the core of what you want to do, what you have to do. And I would say there's a whole range of tools and policies you have to put in place, and some of it's really basic stuff. You got to have a good infrastructure. I mean, a business, particularly a larger business that has manufacturing needs of goods in and out, needs to have a decent road system. And we've made a big step forward as you're watching the new Marquette emerge. It looks a lot better than what this looked like a few years ago. And if you look at, for example, the Menominee Valley, just look out across the way on what's happened there in recent years as a state, we've made big investments in that infrastructure. So you need physical infrastructure. You also need, for the entrepreneurs, you need a way to really help them get over the hump. It's something that in the past, Wisconsin, over many years, we've always been among the lower states in business startups. It's just sort of like we haven't had enough entrepreneurs and enough capital behind them. One of the most successful things we did over the last few years was something called Act 255, which gives early investment tax credits to people who are willing to put early seed stage money into businesses. That's been so successful that we've actually used up all those tax credits, and my budget would put I think about $15 million more of those tax credits out there. This is to help people get those businesses up. You need a real research core. I mean, a lot of the newer businesses are coming out of research. And, you know, in Madison, it's sort of happening because you've got this huge, one of the top 2 or 3 research institutions in the country there. But we have made major investments and are going to continue to make more, as I mentioned earlier, in the research capacity in southeast Wisconsin. And particularly to develop, Marquette's been a major part of this with the other institutions. In Madison, it's a little easier because you got one big institution. In Milwaukee, you've got a variety of them, and they really have to work together to get that done. And in addition, we have targeted, we have a number of targeted tax credits and others for people that come into areas. I've asked the legislature, I can do this sort of to some extent, but I hope they'd follow me completely. I've asked them to give me a set of economic incentives directed specifically at communities that have an unemployment rate that's 50% higher than the state average. But as a matter of state policy, that's what we really work through our Department of Commerce to do, is to try to really make sure that the tax credits and things we do have are going to communities where they are most in need. So if there were one simple answer, somebody would have figured it out. I think you've got to have the whole range, and you've got to work on every one of those every single day, and just be consistent and really focused on what you're trying to get done.
Let's just take 1 or 2 more questions. Right there.
You talked earlier about public service and how you went into public service right out of school. My question for you as a dental student is, the amount of loans that I'm going to owe and to go into public service right away isn't really an option. Is there something that the state could do to help pay for those loans, to go to an area of high need?
Yes, and I think in the area of for dentistry, we really need it, and I hope there are ways for some of these really necessary occupations that through loan forgiveness and other areas we can entice people to go. From what I'm talking to many dentists, and I know Marquette has worked on this, and I appreciate it because they've had the program by which people go into smaller towns. But there are 2 very, very areas that are very badly underserved, and they're the inner city and they're very rural areas. And And I think that if there are things we can do to help people set up their practice, many people who go there love it once they go there. But so it's a kind of a question of getting them there and getting them settled down.
I think we're going to wrap it up there out of respect for the governor's schedule. I'd like to thank all of you here today for coming, and let's give a round of applause to
Thank
Governor
you.
Doyle.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.